Hi, and welcome to the Vince Unlimited YouTube channel. I'm Vince. This is my Gilera 50 touring moped story. The transformation of becoming a teenager is very traumatic. Your mental state changes as dramatically as your physical appearance, and your needs change too. Transport suddenly becomes essential, as the world doesn't just revolve around the bit of grass, bushes and a muddy stream just outside the front door. It's then that the explorer within starts to make a few tentative steps into the unknown. This is why, as a teenager, I was gutted to be not allowed to have a bicycle due to some old fatherly nonsense about not keeping up with traffic. This all only increased my burgeoning urge to get outside of my parents, plus I live far enough away from my school to miss out on social activities that involved pointlessly hanging around. Furthermore, my mobility was hampered by not being given any pocket money in case I recklessly secretly spent it on buying a bike. Though I was pretty fit, like all kids were in the 70s, I couldn't keep up on foot when they all pedalled off to the next crucial hanging about point. All this meant that when I was 16 and legally allowed and indeed encouraged by my dad to ride a powered vehicle, I was transformed. Mopeds, he wisely argued, were able to keep up with all the dangerous traffic, cleverly concealing the fact that giving his own children permission to have a powered two-wheeler was a great excuse for him to go out and get one as well. I discovered that the day I first rode a moped was as important to me as the time when a caterpillar first emerges as a butterfly. Although anyone witnessing those first tentative miles would probably liken it to an hour-old fawn riding a wasp. Step back 24 months and my elder brother of 2 years, hello Mark, he was provided with a choice that I would soon be facing myself. My parents would buy him a gleaming brand new moped on his 16th birthday, or a similarly valued but second-hand motorcycle when he had reached 17 a year later. Well, he needed transport to get to sixth form school, so spurned any delayed gratification for immediate reward. With the guiding help of Dad, he had chosen with his head, not his heart, and wisely selected a Gilera 50 Touring. A less common, but strong, substantial and comfortable beast based on an accommodating small motorcycle frame from the Gilera 150cc motorbike. Back to me, and when I reached the magic age myself, I was also offered a new ped, or instead I could opt for the second-hand motorbike a year later when I became 17. Because Mark had generously offered me to allow him to use his Gilera when he wasn't using it, which was just work commuting by then, I decided to defer my own gift for a year and use his Gilera as and when I could. Mark rarely saw it on weekends again. The near 80 miles to each gallon meant that my wages, yes, I worked from the age of 16, but don't fret, it wasn't up a chimney or anything. Yes, my wages could easily keep the tank filled to the brim and my newfound wanderlust was well accommodated. The sturdy design meant it was a comfortable bike, which was just as well as I spent many a full day buzzing along for hours on end. There was barely a road on the south coast I hadn't been down. In fact, some started to show signs of wear from overuse. Being Italian, the bike not me, it was red and handled well. In those days only Italian metal could properly get round a bend. The Japanese models would squirm about as if the frame was disconnected to other vital bits, like the front wheels or the back wheels. The proper motorcycle design ensured that the only restriction was the stupidly positioned pedals. These actual revolving working cycle pedals, which are a legal moped requirement, could theoretically propel the bike without using the engine, but needed extreme effort to do so. At least they both locked comfortably in a parallel forward position, which not all did, even if they grounded out far too easily when cornering. Tyre technology was dire compared to today's wide sticky compounds, but this solid little bike could be predictably pushed to the limits of ground clearance, and frequently was. The inevitable downside, because there is always one, was the top speed. At 45 miles per hour, most 16-year-olds today, were it not for the invention of the video game of course, would be clapping their hands and squealing with pleasure as they charged along in a stream of Castrol blue haze, speeding fines and zits. But this was 1977 and Yamaha had just released the seminal FS1E, its new 50cc sports moped, and my mate Jeff had one. the disc brake equipped yellow DX version for all you moped anoraks. The Fizzy, as it had become known by everyone of that generation, was a strange skinny little thing. Not unlike Jeff, come to think of it, but it had an enviable top end of around 50 miles an hour. It was probably only 48, but the 65 mile an hour that showed on the highly dubious Speedo and now ingrained into the memories meant that all male teens wanted one more than top 10 singles, canned lager and Clearasil. And when they got it, inevitably its little heart was pushed to the limit whenever ridden. And then there was the Honda. Not the ubiquitous Cub step-through, but their dubiously entitled SS50, their own version of a mini racer. This would speed along at a shown 58, be nearly as quick as I am, and annoyingly my friend Dave had one of these. My Gilera, or should I say Mark's Gilera, was beaten hands down for top-end speed. And as teenagers' brains do not allow them to temper the throttle, all our ride-outs together usually meant me following behind in that slipstream of blue haze. Till I got to a bend, of course, as the Far Eastern bikes couldn't handle anything other than a straight without threatening to do live origami with their frames. Or when we had to ride up a hill, as their screaming Japanese machines were so power-stressed they had no discernible torque. Plus, when we started using the mopeds for their true use, which was picking up girls, the Italian stallion still went 45 with a passenger on board, while the other lightweights wheezed along at about 40. Ha! Long live torque! So other than top speed and limiting cornering angles, there was nothing to beat the Gilera. I acknowledge that the electrics as a miserable 6-volt system were inadequate, barely powering the headlight, which used to beam only as bright as the moped was revved, but they were all like that in those days. However, the fit and finish was good, reliability was excellent, it looked like a real motorbike, was strong as an ox, plus the accommodation and comfort were first class. So, would I choose it if I had my time again? Definitely no. It only did 45 and that was all that mattered. I should have had a Fizzy and sworn to this day that it did at least 180 miles an hour, 2 up cresting Ben Nevis. But in hindsight, my memories of not of the big seat, the vivacious colour, the accurate handling, or even the miserly top speed. I was 16, confident, daring. Couple that with inexperience, and the net result, as many found out, was falling off. The halcyon days of the moped were marred by crashes, copious amounts of them, and when you live through them, they make passable pub stories. The first was typical. After visiting my friends Adi and Mick across town, I decided on a detour on the return trip. On unfamiliar roads, I would now be wary. At 16, I was just plain carefree. It wasn't the high speed or even the appearance of a roundabout behind the blind bend that caught me out. It was the panic braking that caused the spill. Even today, the road is so quiet I could have sailed straight on. But at the time, not knowing the terrain, I grabbed far too much brake and stupidly locked the front wheel. The inevitable occurred and I was sent sprawling onto the tarmac, watching the Gilera horizontally spin away from me towards the horizon and shower spectacular sparks. This itself, whilst dramatic, hardly warrants pub story status. What elevated it to this was a busload of pensioners parked on the far side of the roundabout. Every one of those beige-coated souls turned to look at the full line in the road, this sideways bike still purring away. No one came to the rescue. Presumably I was okay or dead, with neither option needing their involvement. I just lay there. I wasn't actually hurt. Reasonable grey clothing, gloves, boots and a helmet sort of that. A bit shocked perhaps, but mainly because this was my first off and I hadn't yet worked out what to do. Later experience of these things taught me that you are allowed to get up if you want to, but how I was supposed to know that, I don't know. In fact, later on, getting up too early was the problem, but for that anecdote, you'll have to wait until I tell you all about my Honda CX-500. Why not like, comment or subscribe to my channel to encourage this? Anyway, back to the day in question. I just lay there wondering whether an ambulance should magically arrive, or a policeman, or my mother. I must have been there for some time before I realised my mistake and cautiously rose, dusted myself off, picked up the bike and rode away. I remember waving to the crowd on the buses I passed, trying to promote an image that was all planned and I'd be back around again for a repeat performance should they cheer loud enough. One or two waved back, but I wasn't about to do it all again. I rode off into the distance, a bit more carefully from then on. It was the first of too many spills which punctuate my early riding days. In fact, I recall another moment in those early days during a ride out to Bournemouth with Dave on his SS50. It was a fine summer's day and we fancied an ice cream and gorbets and girls in bikinis. So we set out on the 40-mile journey, an epic at moped speeds. I hadn't had the bike long. It must have been just had the new handlebars fitted after the bus stop episode, as the bike still wore its L plates. Unusually, and the only one amongst my friends, I later took the moped test to be able to ride L plate free, which got me stopped by men in white cars with orange stripes quite a lot. However, passing the test did allow me to take all my girlfriends on the back, but not all at once though. The L plate was significant, in fact crucial to the event. The rear one had been fitted by Mark and Dad 2 years early and mounted attached to the Gilera's rear number plate by a Meccano strip, and during that tortuous Bournemouth journey had loosened itself and started rattling. Most would have ignored it, hoping it would detach, but the rattling irritated me. At this point I should have pulled over and attended to it in safety at the side of the road, but as we were riding solo I was struggling as usual to keep up with the Honda ahead. Stopping was clearly out of the question, so I decided to inspect the problem on the move. Now, imagine the scenario. A real don't try this at home moment. I'm doing 45, yes, that speed again, leaning back to fiddle with an L plate that's mounted low and behind the rear wheel. If Jerry Cottrell had seen me do this, I'd been signed up to a circus there and then. But I didn't fall off, not whilst checking the plate. The trouble started when I settled back to look forward. I was still doing 45, but now there was a pavement directly ahead. Not that the road direction had changed, just unbeknownst to me, my own course. So I did what anyone would do at that time. I hit it fair and square. The front went airborne and the bike came down on its left side, with me half underneath. Luckily, the tree-lined avenue was more gap than tree, so I came to a slow but mercifully recoverable stop. I was a bit sore and I felt stupid, but I now knew that I could get back up to ride again. After all, Dave hadn't noticed and was ploughing on regardless, almost as if he'd forgotten how to use mirrors. I had to make up time. I lifted the bike back onto the road, reselected neutral and restarted the stalled engine. It started as usual first time, so I pulled in the clutch to select first gear and the cable broke. The impact onto the summery softened pavement was taken by the clutch lever, the connector of which had filled with the tarmac blob which had managed to sever the clutch when I operated. Result, I had no clutch. No problem. Clutches, they're for pussies anyway. My foot slammed it into gear and I shot off after Dave. He was devastated. He had missed the exciting spectacle and more importantly our chances of pulling were blown. Shaken, I really wanted to go straight home to miss the weekend crowds, but Dave needed his ice cream. So we went to the beachside and had ice cream. His topped with crushed nuts, mine with a strawberry sauce the ice cream man never gave me, and a light sprinkling of gravel rash. This was eventually followed by a mad dash back home along a crowded bank holiday on a route on a moped with no clutch. I figured that all I had to do was keep going, so that's what I did. I never dropped below 30 miles an hour, timed all the traffic lights to perfection, went straight ahead through the roundabouts, whether the nearby cars were stopped or not, and got all the way to a set of lights in Southampton before a long red light stop caused me to stall, some 40 miles after setting off. It's amazing what feats are achievable in the face of adversity. I suppose in hindsight I'm rather fond of the Gilera. It took me on adventures I had never considered before and accompanied me through a harrowing time of growing up. I learned to ride solo, to corner, brake in an emergency, to take passengers and yes, to crash. It was an important time and the moped played its part without complaint. I handed it back to Mark when I got my Yamaha trail bike, my own real motorbike, when I turned 17 and started the adventures all over again. But it was the Gilera that kicked it all off and made me a biker, in quite an unpredictable, disorganised and dramatic manner. I suppose it's a bit like being a teenager itself in a way. You've just ridden pillion on this particular video with me, Vince, holding onto the handlebars, hoping there is no diesel spill on the roundabout of life on which we have travelled together. If you want more thrills and spills, I suggest you throw your leg over the seat of YouTube and subscribe to my Vince Unlimited channel, where all sorts of tales could await you. And please, feel free to add your own stories of moped daring do's and don'ts in the comments section. And also, add a like to this video for good measure. For now, this has been a Vince Unlimited Bikes production. This true story was written by me, filmed on my iPhone X, edited on my iPad Air 4 in Apple iMovie using Keynote for the main titles. All the photos used here were the originals by me or my family, so I can declare this a film by Vince, copyright 2022. See you all again soon. But before you go, earlier in this video I mentioned my teenage friend Dave and his Honda SS50. Dave Bareham was a good and close friend of mine. We went to junior school together. We were also both in the same Cub Scouts group and visited each other's houses to play together. We often walked home from school together, talking and joking, and when he got a bicycle he often kindly gave me lifts on his crossbar when school finished. He even let me borrow his bike so I could learn to ride one, and later I often borrowed his sister's near matching but embarrassingly girls framed bike, although we had to keep well away from my parents' house and my draconian father's strict rules on bicycles. Regretfully, Dave and I never kept in touch much after those moped days, with us both having increasingly responsible different work commitments taking up our time. A few years later on, I heard he bought a Honda CX500 motorbike, much like I would go on to do, but the reason he chose his was that when he was cleaning his previous steed, whilst running the engine in gear to save all the hard work and hand spinning the rear wheel and spokes, his cleaning cloth got caught up in the rear drive chain and sprocket, dragging the cloth and a finger through the cogs, resulting in a red splurge up an adjacent wall and a hurried visit to A&E to have his stump sewn up. Followed, presumably, by a visit to the Honda dealership to trade up to the CX500, a bike with no rear chain but instead sporting a prop shaft rear drive system. However, sadly, I never got to see Dave again. After finding out about his mishap with the bike cleaning, I also later heard that he had joined the police force, and while serving as a cadet, was apparently stabbed to death in the line of duty. I haven't been able to verify this information. I sincerely hope it's wrong. I miss my kind and generous good friend Dave, and dedicate this video to him.